For Trump, Venezuela was always about how he defines U.S. national security. And it was never about a turnover in power there or a democratic transition. It wasn't about domestic politics for Venezuela. It was about national security as defined by Trump and his administration around immigration, principally around drugs and narco trafficking, and of course, around energy assets. And that's why we see what we see unfolding right now, which is you have to hold sort of a confluence of conflicting ideas in your mind, which is on the one hand, Trump is pleased with the outcome of the removal of Nicolas Maduro, but who stays atop of Venezuela right now? Well, it's Delcy Rodriguez, his number two, somebody who herself is under sanction by the U.S. And that's what we're seeing unfold. And the big question, Tom,
Yeah.
which is what you were just hitting on, is about political risk in sort of the classic sense of political risk. Why is the market not yet responding? Well, there's not that much vulnerable investable assets in Venezuela at this moment in
Right.
time. But the question is, are investors going to go back in? And Trump certainly hopes the answer is
I
yes.
mean, I really get emotional, folks, when I walk by in any given town, some memorial to the people who participated, injured, died in Vietnam, and they call it a conflict, which drives me
Yeah.
absolutely
Call it what it is, what it
bonkers.
was.
Okay, so there's Alexis with a proper question, Lindsay Newman. What do you call this stuff? Is this like, are we doing police actions with our military?
Yeah, and Tom, look, in my line of work, there is a difference between war and conflict, and words matter. When you say things
Well,
like
thank you.
tension, it's very different than, riots and vandalism and violent riots is a very different thing than protests. For example, when we look at, in the case of Iran, and it's a very relevant conversation to be had. Look, this is a world in which, we knew Trump and his administration were going to be more ambitious this time around. It depends where, whether you approve of or you like what he's doing. We knew when he set out that executive orders on day one in office about foreign policy, this is not an America first that's isolationist. This is an America first that is looking to remake the world in the image of what Donald Trump and his administration view as how it should be. That's what we see going on right now in Greenland, Venezuela, all these locations where there is activity, whether it is hot activity or whether it's diplomacy that's happening right now. But the point being is that this administration is using a vast array of tools in its toolkit, not just sanctions and tariffs like we saw during the first Trump administration, but it has demonstrated a willingness to force posture and to deploy force.
Lindsay, there's this decision now, at least for the moment, a military action has been paused against Iran. So the U.S. now turning to economic pressure on Iran, rolling out a host of new sanctions. Is that going to get the job done? What kind of sanctions are we looking at to move the needle here with Iran?
Yeah, Alexis, as you rightfully point out, the Trump administration imposed 25% secondary tariffs this week, and then just yesterday imposed fairly limited sanctions on targeted individuals within the Iran regime. The story here is that it seems as though we were very close to a limited military action going ahead in the middle of this week, that at the last moment, there was
Right.
intervention for Trump that suggested, this was not going to reach its aims and there was going to be vulnerability for U.S. assets and personnel in the region. This is not the end of the story. We know that the
Right.
USS Abraham Lincoln is moving within the region as we speak. But the issue here is a lot of this rests now, the ball is somewhat in Iran's court. Iran is somewhat in a double bind because now that
All right.
the pressure is sort of alleviated, what will Iran do as people leave their
Right.
homes and the internet comes back on? They will have to continue to apply repression.
Right.
That is their only lever right now. And if doing so means that the U.S. continues to watch and then say, well, this is no longer acceptable,
Right.
then we can still be
Right.
back in the world of some sort of action,
Can I
military
do
action
can I
coming
do a
forward.
nerd academic question?
Well, please do.
And now,
Always.
folks, for Lindsay Newman at King's College London. Lindsay, what is it like to work in a program with the halo of Sir Lawrence Friedman Emeritus hovering over you at King's College? He owns the high ground of this analysis. What's it like working there with Emeritus Professor Lawrence Friedman?
Well, obviously, it goes without saying, that he is, one of the greats. And I'm a visiting research fellow, so my affiliation is, fairly flexible and I have quite a lot of freedom in what I do. But it's a wonderful institution that has been at
Yeah.
the forefront of, all forms of these, all forms of conflict and war, as we were talking about earlier, and thinking around that for as long as we've been doing this.